Hi there. Thank you so much for having us, Gareth and Izzy. So I'm Mags. I realized it didn't actually say in my little label there on the Zoom, but I'm Mags, and I head up the medical cannabis study that we are running at the moment with drug science, which is called Project 2021. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what I do in a minute. I thought I'd just start by saying that, just giving a little bit about my background, because I always think it's interesting to understand where different people have got to where they are now, from a kind of career progression point of view. And certainly when I was at university, I didn't have a clue that I was going to end up, where I am now working in drug policy. I actually did a music degree of all things. And then what ensued after my music degree was a 10-year career in advertising. And it took 10 years for me to realize that actually drug policy and helping influence politics when it comes to drugs and advocating for evidence-based drug policy was really something I'm so passionate about. And that's how I found myself working for drug science. I started about a year and a half ago. So it just goes to show that really you can really transfer skills from another industry over to something that gives you a little bit more sense of purpose, let's say. That's certainly the case for me. So I'm going to share some slides with you guys, and I'm just going to put this full screen. Can you give me a thumbs up if that's showing okay for you? Amazing, that's great. Okay, so drug science. I'm hoping most of you guys, being the Drug Science Student Society of Cardiff, know what drug science is already. But in case you don't, in case you are a visitor, or you've come to watch this video from somewhere completely different, I thought it'd be useful just to do a quick recap as to what drug science is. So we are the UK's leading drug policy and research charity. We were founded by a very famous professor called Professor David Nutt back in 2010. Now, he used to be advisor on drugs to the government back when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, but he famously got sacked by the government in that position because he wrote a satirical paper comparing horse riding, aka equity, to ecstasy, or otherwise known as MDMA. And I'll let you guys have a look at that in your own time. But as you can imagine, it didn't go down very well with the government, where the drugs are a subject matter that are determined by the Home Office rather than the Health Department at the moment, which is something that we're very, very keen at drug science to change in the future. So we advocate for evidence-based drug policy. That's policy not based on politics and commercial interests, but based on evidence, so based on data and research. So we at Drug Science actually do conduct our own research. We publish the findings that we find through the studies that we do. We provide education of lots of different kinds, like running events a little bit like this, also putting out resources and slides that you can find on our website. And yes, studies like the one I'm going to come on to talk to you in a minute about. Our three key focuses as a charity are safe drug consumption, psychedelic drug research, and medical cannabis. So tonight we're going to focus on medical cannabis and tell you a bit about the work that we're doing and how that's really looking to influence drug policy across the UK at the moment. So the law around cannabis has been an interesting one over the last few decades. Since 1971, the so-called war on drugs, cannabis was classed in Class B, which meant that you get up to 5 years in prison or an unlimited fine for possession. And if you had intent to supply, you could get up to 14 years in prison or an unlimited fine or both. So pretty bad if you get caught with cannabis, selling or consuming in any way. I'm sure you will agree. Then in 2001, the system changed to our scheduling system that we have now. And what that means is cannabis moved over to Schedule 1, which is the most extreme schedule, shall we say. That's the same scheduling as LSD, as MDMA, as magic mushrooms, And even heroin isn't Schedule 1. Heroin is Schedule 2 because it's deemed as having some medicinal value. So for cannabis to be in Schedule 1 was quite an interesting choice, let's say. Whereas if it was in Schedule 2, it would be deemed as having some therapeutic value. And that's what happened a few years later in 2018. So in 2018, it got moved to Schedule 2, and the law changed. That was in November, so that cannabis could finally be used for medical purposes in the UK. And that's why we now talk about medical cannabis as being legalized back in 2018. Although I'm not surprised that some of you don't know that, sadly. So here you go. So where are we now? Cannabis was legalized for medical purposes in November 2018. So this means that specialist doctors, such as the lovely doctor who will be talking to us in a bit, are able to prescribe, but not your GP. GPs cannot prescribe because they're not deemed as specialist consultants in the UK system. So back in 2018, Sajid Javid, who is our now health secretary, but back then he was our home secretary, he was quoted as saying, "Having been moved by heartbreaking cases involving sick children, it was important to me that we took swift benefit from medicinal cannabis." And this was after many families of children with rare forms of epilepsy actually lobbied government to get the law changed. And sadly, since then, only 3 prescriptions of whole plant cannabis have actually been made on the NHS. And they're all for rare forms of epilepsy. So needless to say, there's a lot of work to be done. And that's why we wanted to talk to you guys today, because we want to try and raise awareness around this problem that we have now. Here are the posters of the activist group, or campaigning group, I should say, End Our Pain, who represent the families of the children with rare forms of epilepsy. They were campaigning back in November just gone outside the Houses of Parliament to try and get the government's attention on this really, really urgent state of affairs. You've currently got the families of these children paying up to £2,000 a month in order to get medical cannabis treatment for their children through the private sector because they're unable to access it on the NHS. So something's really got to change. We're in a desperate state at the moment. So why aren't doctors able to prescribe on the NHS? Well, it's a little bit complicated. There's not just one reason. There's not enough UK evidence, according to policy makers, and they have a preference for what we call randomized controlled trials, otherwise known as RCTs, which actually are very, very difficult as a way to monitor medical cannabis and to test medical cannabis. If you want more information on that, you can check out the Drug Science website for more information on why RCTs don't really suit cannabis as a form to test them out. The official NHS guidelines, otherwise known as the NICE guidelines, are extremely restrictive. And at the moment, it needs to be deemed an exceptional case for a child with epilepsy to be considered for a medical cannabis prescription. Also, specialist consultants haven't actually been educated in how to prescribe. So, as a doctor or a medic student, you go to university, you do all your training. And at the moment, the endocannabinoid system and medical cannabis is not a mandatory part of the education. So this is, again, something that we really want to change at Drug Science. And we've actually produced some fabulous educational slides that are perfect for students who are interested in finding out more about medical cannabis education. And of course, that has a knock-on effect with their confidence. If doctors don't have the education, they're not going to feel confident to prescribe either. And that's once you've become a prescriber, it's incredibly complicated to actually become one. And I'm sure our doctor in a moment, a little later on, can tell us how complicated it's been for him to set up as a prescriber. It's no mean feat. And if you can imagine, doctors have so many other specialisms and other things they can concentrate on. To learn a new skill and go through the rigmarole of setting up as a prescriber for a brand in a brand new industry, it's really quite impressive we've got any prescribers at all, to be quite honest. And of course, not having GPs allowed to prescribe just means we've got such a smaller pool of doctors to choose from as well. So it means that you've only got a small number of specialist doctors who are actually educated and willing and able to prescribe currently in the UK. And so Drug Science launched Project 2021 2 years ago, back in November 2019. So what is Project 2021? Well, we are the biggest medical cannabis real world registry in Europe, I do believe. We're at 2,500 patients at the moment, but we are planning to grow up to 20,000 patients. And that's why it's so important today that we get the word out and that we speak to you guys about the work that we're doing so that you can help us do that. We are funded by a handful of cannabis producers, so producers who actually create the cannabis products themselves, and that enables us to actually offer subsidized products to the patients that we have as well. So it's win-win. We're benefiting the patients, and through the study, those producers who are funding it get the data from the patients in order to find out how their products are faring and to be able to make then improvements to their products and understand how they're being used to treat the patients on the study. So it's really helping people from all angles. And as I say, at the end here, you can see we do try and be really clear and competitive on the pricing for patients as well. The data that we publish or gets published through either medical journals like the BMJ and also the Drug Science Journal, and through blog articles and our monthly updates on the Drug Science website as well. So again, just check out our website if you want to look at any of the publications that we've put out so far. But the most important thing on this slide is the bit at the bottom with the arrow where I say private sector to NHS funding. So as I mentioned before, we haven't seen barely any prescription on the NHS. So we're having to operate this study through the private sector. And that means consultation costs and prescription costs that are more than you would be paying on the NHS. On the NHS, you pay about £10 for your prescription and you don't pay for consultations. But sadly, in the private sector, the doctors have got to cover their costs. So that does come with, a cost to patients. But we're hoping that through gathering data and evidence through this project, this study, that we'll be able to influence politics, influence government, and get NHS funding so that people can access this amazing medicine for free in the future. So many people are eligible for medical cannabis in Project 2021. Here on the screen, you can see just a handful of the conditions that we see currently being prescribed for with medical cannabis at the moment. The two most common are anxiety and chronic pain. In fact, chronic pain conditions actually make up more than half of the patients that we have currently on Project 2021. Here you can see a breakdown from December just gone of our total patient cohort. So you can see that we've got over 1,000 patients there with chronic pain and over 600 patients with anxiety. There's actually a lot more research into medical cannabis for chronic pain than there is for anxiety, but we can tell from anecdotal evidence, and that's from the testimonials and patient feedback that we get, that we're seeing really, really amazing results for psychiatric conditions such as anxiety and PTSD as well. And you can see here, we've also got a cohort of multiple sclerosis patients and epilepsy, and right at the end there, Tourette syndrome. In fact, on Tourette syndrome, if anyone's interested, there is an amazing video on YouTube by a patient of ours called Jim Finch. And Jim actually recorded himself before and after taking his medication. And I'm sure most people on this call are familiar with Tourette's and the symptoms that it causes. And really seeing the before and after effects with medical cannabis, they speak for themselves. It's quite amazing the effect that we see very, very quickly through vaping medical cannabis. So how it works is we ask our patients to choose a clinic through our website, and they can choose it based on the clinic's costs and on the specialisms that are had by those doctors at prescribing at the clinic. And then they contact a clinic and they ask to join the project. It's as simple as that. And it's up to the clinic to go through the eligibility criteria and make sure that that patient is suitable to join the study. Cost-wise, as I said, the clinics set their own costs. And then from a prescription point of view, what you can expect to pay is up to £150 per product per month. Now, that might sound like a lot of money, and I appreciate for students, it is a lot of money. But when we're talking about, a life-changing medicine, something that really can transform your day-to-day, as you'll see from some of the students that we actually have on the project at the moment, that they really find that cost is worth every penny. So when you think of cannabis, you might think of people smoking a joint, being completely honest, but actually medical cannabis isn't like that at all. Medical cannabis is usually either in the form of flower or in oil, and flower is vaporized. It's not smoked. In fact, smoking medical cannabis is illegal. Not many people seem to know that. And vaporizing flower is actually particularly effective for acute pain. So that means that it has a really more fast acting effect than oil does. But oil doesn't come with kind of all the smells and everything that that cannabis has a lot of stigma around. So and oil also has a more kind of a background effect. But I'm not an expert myself, so I'm going to probably leave it there in terms of the detail. There's lots more information on all of that stuff in the medical cannabis slides that are available on our website. And our doctor who'll be speaking in a bit is much more expert in this field than I. But I just wanted to kind of make the point that it's not just smoking a joint. That's very, very different to how we consume medical cannabis. So I mentioned that we collect data on the study. Of course, that's what makes it a study. We are collecting data in order to influence those NHS guidelines, like I said before. And we use questionnaires that are sent out every 3 months. It's really straightforward. The questionnaires are tailored based on what condition you have, and they're all sent out over email for you to fill in just a few minutes. So before I go, I wanted to show you a few slides that show our student campaign that we ran back in September. So why should students join T21 as patients? Well, some of our clinics offer a £20 discount off initial consultations if you've got a valid student ID. Also, as I mentioned before, we have got capped price medical cannabis, so you shouldn't be paying as much as you would elsewhere if you go through Project 2021. That's the idea. So, so if you're prescribed a product off of our formulary, then it will be capped at a certain price. And finally, from the goodness of your own heart, I hope you will be contributing to the evidence pool that will help us influence those NHS guidelines and hopefully open up access to more people in the future. So our strategy with the student campaign was this here. So first off, I reached out to lots of contacts in different universities. That didn't work at all. No one got back to me at all. So from that point, I really set about tapping into societies like yourselves, different drug science student societies and SSDP societies, which you may or may not have heard of, the Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And I built up an army of student ambassadors, I hope a couple of which will be on this call today. And then from there, we built a bit of a comms plan. So we made student videos, we did a social media campaign, we had newsletter, we had a press release, a blog articles, and then we also ran a student conference to coincide with Freshers Week as well. So all of that meant that we just really wanted to create a bit of a buzz around students and get you guys talking about medical cannabis and about the study, both from a position of maybe joining as a patient, but also, sharing it with your mums, your dads, your aunts, your uncles, and family, and all your friends. The more people who can know that this is available and that they can access medical cannabis treatment now, the better. That was our view. So these are the posters that we made. And as you can see, they're nice and colourful. So I've actually still got a few of these at home. So do just drop me a message actually after this if you're interested in getting hold of a poster. Or maybe, I don't know whether Gareth and Izzy have any to hand, but I can chat to them afterwards about making, thumbs up from Gareth. Great stuff. So there you go. You can get your hands on a poster from Gareth. Excellent stuff. And then in the same vein, we created these fun social media posts, which is going to play on screen now. And I have to say, in the cannabis industry, you don't see enough fun, colourful stuff like this when it comes to medical cannabis. We definitely need to make it a little bit more engaging and visual. So always open to your thoughts and ideas on that kind of thing. Right, let's Go to the next slide. Okay, so I mentioned before that we've got some students already with Project 2021, and these are two of the students that we had record patient stories for us, and you can find these to watch on the Drug Science YouTube channel, so do check that out. You can hear there from Lucy, who herself is a neuroscience student at the University of Sussex, and Tim, who is a sociology student at the University of Chester. That's where he goes to uni. And they've both got really, really interesting stories. Lucy has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means that she's in a lot of pain a lot of the time. She was actually unable to ride a bike or walk until about 2 years ago. So her story is quite incredible. And then we've got Tim, who suffers from a range of different conditions, but the main one being anxiety. And he's found medical cannabis to be a huge benefit to him with his condition. We've created also some fabulous leaflets. I'm hoping Gareth might have some of these as well, but if not, I do have a bunch still at home I can send out to people. But these are really great because they help quash the stigma around medical cannabis, and they really position Project 2021 as a way that you guys can help and get involved with solving the problem really around the cannabis stigma that we still face, even more than 50 years after the war on drugs was declared back in the 70s. We also produced some educational flyers, which I'm hoping to get out in doctors' surgeries quite soon as well. These are just a great way of, I guess, more kind of formally presenting the project to people, especially, I think, I'm thinking older people who might go into doctors' waiting rooms and not know that medical cannabis is a form of treatment to them. I don't know about you guys, but I find myself going to kind of family gatherings and speaking to elderly relatives, and I wish I had flyers like this to hand that I could just dish out to people quite a lot of the time. It's unbelievable to me how few people know that medical cannabis is actually available to them. We also have stickers and badges. I'm not sure how many of them we have left, but I'm hoping to create some more in the future. My point here, though, is we really wanted to create lots of different, merchandise, for want of a better word, marketing materials, so that we could help spread the word in a more kind of engaging way. And here's some fun photos from Freshers Week. You can see all the different university societies getting involved, getting involved there. Gareth, is that you bottom right by any chance?
Yes, it is. I think Izzy deserves to be there as well. She was manning the stall a lot more than I was.
Was she taking the photo, perhaps?
Yeah, she was actually.
Fantastic. Well, there you go. You even made it into my slide deck, so that's fantastic. And as you can see, it's just so we just appreciate you guys so much for your help in all this and getting the word out. It makes such a difference to us to know that we're kind of reaching different pockets of the country, and also speaking to younger people as well, who can really help make a difference, and the medic students of the future as well coming through. So how can you help? This is my final slide, by the way. How can you help? So first off, you can print off your own resources. So all those things that I've just shown you just there, the posters, the leaflets, the flyers, even the stickers, actually, you can actually print them off yourself at home via our Google Drive link. And what I'll do is I'll send this PDF with all the links in it to Gareth so that he can share it with all of you after the event. And yeah, if you do want to print your own or share our social media assets on your socials, then please do. Just remember to tag us, Drug Science, if you do share on socials. Please do tell your friends and family, because the chances are they don't know the truth about medical cannabis, and that's why we're here. That's what we want to advocate. It's all evidence-based. It's all based on the data and the research. You can also download our free student educational modules, which are on the Drug Science website, and that's just drugscience.org.uk. And finally, please tell your doctor about Project 2021, because if your doctor knows that medical cannabis access is available to people, then he or she or they can tell their patients to how to get hold of medical cannabis if that doctor can't prescribe themselves. So that's me. Thank you ever so much for having me. And I'd love to hear from any of you if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Mags. That was absolutely fantastic. First things first, I've got to say I cannot recommend enough the YouTube channel that you were talking about the patient stories. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about, being able to make a difference to patients. With regards to the posters, I was wagging my thumb quite a bit there. We have so many posters.
We have quite a few posters
so
left.
many. If you're in the Cardiff area, then please message either myself or Izzy and come pick up some of our many beautiful posters. Like Mags was saying, if you have any questions, feel free to either send them into the chat or directly message us here. I'd like to start off with one, actually. Just to keep it nice and broad, what do you think the benefits are of somebody, for example, somebody in the audience, of signing up with Project 2021 as opposed to self-medicating with the cannabis that you might get off the street?
Oh, that's such a good question, Gareth. The first thing I would say is if you were to be caught in possession of that cannabis, you know, as I touched upon, you know, you still get into a lot of trouble, you know, if you're caught with cannabis. Whereas if you have a legal cannabis prescription, then what you can do is either have your prescription on you, or you can get hold of something called a can card, which is not, you know, it doesn't completely protect you from you know, having your medication confiscated. However, it does prove that you have that you are using cannabis for medical purposes. And CanCard are actually bringing out a new thing very, very soon, where you're going to have you can choose to have your prescription printed on the card as well, so that if you're a medical cannabis patient, you can prove that you have a prescription without taking all your medication out with you. So yeah, just to say that you are protecting yourself, you're much safer if you are if you have a legal medical cannabis prescription, rather than sourcing it from your dealer through the illicit market. The other thing I would say is, you know what's in your cannabis if you're using medical cannabis rather than getting it from your dealer. On our formulary, where we have our list of products available, we list there, we have patient and clinician leaflets. So that's information that's available both to the doctor and to the patient, which gives details around what's in your product. We are really trying to hone in on providing as much detail around the terpene profiles and minor cannabinoid content of all the products that we offer. And what I can say is producers are getting better and better at providing that information. So, you know, your dealer's not going to be giving you the breakdown of the terpene profiles of your flower that you get from him or her, you know, so that kind of thing, again, you can try and then ensure you're getting better consistency of the product that you're having. And then a final thing to say, but I don't want to generalize. I'm going to have to generalize a bit here, is that what we tend to see, or certainly have seen in the past, is that the flower that you would get from a dealer might be quite high in THC content. And that's part of the reason why we hear that people using cannabis through the illicit market might end up, you know, experiencing paranoia, or even it could trigger psychosis. And this is where a lot of the stigma comes from, that people are using particularly high THC flower, or at least flower that is too high for their own needs. Sometimes high THC flower is necessary. So if, for example, for epilepsy patients, high THC is a good thing. But, you know, if you're using it for anxiety, that could actually have a detrimental effect on you. So that's why it's really important to know what's in the product that you are consuming.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that answers the question in a lot of detail. We have time for one last question on the chat, just been sent here, is why do we need more evidence around medical cannabis when there is some available overseas?
Oh gosh, another fantastic question, and one that frustrates me greatly. It does seem like our government doesn't really want to pay attention to the evidence that is overseas. They want UK-based evidence. which is, yeah, it's very annoying to say the least. And also, as I touched upon in my presentation, they want ideally that they're not a big fan of real world evidence. So that's the kind of evidence that we are collecting at the moment, where we are collecting data through questionnaires from patients, as opposed to doing a randomized controlled trial where you would have, it's a much more structured, much more expensive way to test a medication, which usually involves having a placebo group versus, a kind of controlled group versus the group that are actually receiving the medication. That can cost millions of pounds, but the RCTs it's just still possible to do them with medical cannabis. I have heard of an RCT that's taken place in Israel, for example, but that's Israel and not the UK. And so unfortunately, the governments are not currently funding an RCT in the UK. I mean, they're not even funding our registry. We're a charity having to do it off our own back. So it's a very frustrating political situation to be on. And with that in mind, Professor Nutt and the team at Drug Science are actually looking at preparing a paper at the moment to advocate to government that real world evidence needs to be taken more seriously. So if we can change the way that people review the data and review the evidence and make sure that studies like ours can be taken seriously, then we can hopefully influence nice guidelines that way.
Amazing, thank you. I don't think we have any more questions on the chat. I can see there that, Mags, you've added the link to the 2021 website. So
yes, and what I would say is, please do join the T21 mailing list. It's separate to the Drug Science mailing list. On there, we've got specifically medical cannabis related stuff, updates as to how the study's going. We put data, our latest the previous month's data on there every single month, along with data insights, where we call them data nuggets, where we delve a little bit deeper into a particular question that we answer with the data that we're gathering. Basically, we want to be as transparent as possible, as open as possible, and to give back to the people who are giving their data very kindly to us. We've got absolutely nothing to hide. The learnings that we're getting through are speaking for themselves. We're seeing people's quality of life improve significantly after only 3 months of treatment. So that means their sleep is improving, their depression is lifting, anxiety levels are improving, all these different things that affect our day-to-day ways in which we live our lives. We're seeing hugely improved through medical cannabis. So as I say, the more that, if any of you guys are up for kind of helping us spread the word, then we would appreciate it so much.
That's absolutely wonderful to hear. Unless you have anything else to add, let's move on to our next speaker then. Thank you so much, Mags.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Dave Howells. So I'll pass straight on to you. So all the best. The stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Gareth and Izzy, and thank you, Mags, for all the hard work you do and everything that Drug Science does. I think it has moved on the medical cannabis discussion, immeasurably. And I think Drug Science was one of the influences that drew me into this area. I think it's fabulous that you have Drug Science student societies now. Had I been, had that been around in the late 90s when I was a medical student in Cardiff, I would certainly have joined up without a shadow of a doubt. So I'm just, a couple of decades too late, perhaps. So, but no, thank you for all you're doing as well. And it really will. It'll draw on a new generation of researchers and people who can influence policy, etc., etc. It's it's great to see, and obviously Drug Science is about more than just cannabis. However, we are here to talk about cannabis today, so we'll try and limit it to that. But I think there's an exciting future ahead of you, and good luck with everything you're doing. Okay, well, on to us. I'm Dr. David Howells. This is my wife, Samantha Ashton. This is we are the co-founders of Cannabis Clinic Cardiff, and I suppose what we wanted to discuss with you today is kind of how we got to where we are, and then have a think about the pertinent issues, because this is a topic we could discuss for hours, and trying to work out of all of those areas quite what takes priority is difficult. So if anyone does have any burning questions, if you put them in the chat as we go along, we'll try and answer them as we go along as well, because certainly we're not going to be able to cover everything today, but feel free to get in touch with us via our website as well, Cardiff, cannabiscliniccardiff.co.uk, and we'll have discussions. So what I'd like to start with is just hand over to Sam, so she can kind of describe how we got to the point we are today.
Well, hi, I'm Sam. I'm a patient and I have a legal prescription of cannabis, and that is something that happened last year. And how we got to that, I had no idea, like many people back in November 2018, that medical cannabis had become legal. So I was drawing my medical cannabis from the black market and having dreadful trouble, dreadful consistency, and it was not a great thing. We came across drug science, and I was actually watching a webinar with Professor David Nutt, and Dave was in the background. You can prescribe cannabis, and I looked at Dave and went, you could do that. And Dave looked at me and said, we could get you one of those. And that's what we did. So while he was setting up the clinic, I became legal. And that was where we started off a few months ago. And we started seeing patients last November. And the whole aim of the clinic is to give access to medical cannabis for people with mental health issues. And that's what we're here to do. Yeah, so I'm a consultant psychiatrist. This is something I've done, say, for the past 14 years in elderly care. So I deal with a lot of people with depression, dementia, psychosis, anxiety. But medical cannabis can be helpful for an enormous array of conditions, not least pain, as was discussed by Mags. Now, because I'm a mental health specialist, I am restricted by the legislation to prescribe for mental health conditions. So that's why we are essentially a mental health clinic. When people come to us, they self-refer in, and they describe their problem, and we give them a short consultation via email to say, look, these are the things we do, and these are the things we would need if you were to come to our clinic for an assessment. So we request of them their medical record. So to come to us, a person has to have a diagnosis of a mental health condition, and they have to have tried at least 2 therapies. So that would potentially be, say, an antidepressant and maybe a course of CBT or several antidepressants, whatever it is. But we would offer to do that initial consultation with their GP notes free of charge. We want to make sure that nobody is paying money and wasting it if there is little to no chance that they would actually get a prescription. So we do a lot of work straight up before we even offer an appointment to make sure that someone hasn't got physical health problems that might complicate things, that they're sorry. We'll carry on and we'll see what we can do about that. So that, yeah, that there are medical complications, there aren't any that would cause problems, and also that they don't have a history of psychosis. Psychosis is the big thing that people tend to worry about when we're talking about medical cannabis. When I've been talking to my colleagues about this, that's the one thing people mention, because in our experience as mental health professionals, we see a lot of people with psychosis, and we see that when they use cannabis, even if they say that it makes them feel better, it does cause deterioration in their symptoms. And I've seen many, many cases where this is so, that actually people with psychosis do have problems when they take cannabis, particularly from the black market, which has the high THC in it.
as we know from cannabis, it contains an awful lot of different chemicals. You know, there are hundreds of different chemicals within cannabis, so it's not just one thing. It's not just THC. There's another one in there called CBD, and that's never been made illegal in this country and is available commercially as a food supplement or a novel food item, which makes no medical claims whatsoever. But interestingly, some of the medical grade CBD has been used for psychosis. So even though, you know, THC, you know, undoubtedly can make psychosis worse, the CBD has been shown to be as effective as one of the leading antipsychotics. So actually, there's a good argument that we should be using CBD for psychosis. The side effect profile of CBD is far less than a major antipsychotic, which has, you know, a great many problems with it. And I suppose in the same way that you can use medical cannabis alongside opiates and use fewer opiates, potentially you could use CBD alongside antipsychotics and use lower amounts of those medications as well. In addition to those two, so the THC, CBD are the main things people think about. You know, there are a huge number. Mags mentioned the terpene profiles. They are believed to have effects in and of themselves. You know, there's certain terpenes which are cannabinoid activators as well. And also within cannabis, there's about 140 or more separate cannabinoids. So each one of those potentially could have uses as well. So the mere thought that cannabis was once put in a Schedule 1 of having no medicinal benefit whatsoever, it is just laughable. It astonishes me, it really does. So what we've got is a complex compound or complex product with lots and lots of different chemicals and compounds and terpenes and cannabinoids in it. So it is really hard to differentiate those different pieces out to either create a consistent product or for studies to be done on these products, which can kind of tease apart some of those effects. Western medicine likes one drug for one effect. You know, that's the way it works, and it stands up to statistical rigor. You know, you can do a placebo-controlled trial very easily if you've got one versus another. It's like placebo versus an active component, and then you can do your stats on it and go, yes, there is a high degree of confidence. But if you've got a botanical medicine with all these hundreds of different chemicals in it, quite how you're going to differentiate what is doing what is very difficult. And I can understand why, you know, the medical community maybe is scared by that. Maybe they're put off doing the studies because it is a very difficult thing to get the head around. But all of those chemicals together are felt to have a more beneficial effect than any one on their own. This is termed an entourage effect. And, you know, it is a little bit of a controversial topic that, you know, this entourage effect exists. But I would say, actually, there are other instances where you can see the entourage effect in action. When Sativex was created, that was a THC and CBD combination. They'd done the studies for that, and that was in MS spasticity. And they tried it with THC, they tried it with CBD, and then they tried it both together. Well, those two together had a better effect than either one on their own. So that is a form of entourage effect. So it's recognized that the entourage effect is a real thing. When you look at the HIV drugs and the AZT, you have a triple therapy. The triple therapy is because they have an entourage effect. They work better than anyone themselves. So I would say, rather than it being a concept that is limited to a special category of cannabinoid medicines, then actually this is the real world. When you get to a ripe old age, chances are you'll be on 10 or more different medications. And I see people taking all these different ones, and you know, we don't really know what all of those different medications do in combination. And it wasn't that long ago that older people, just weren't studied. The exclusion criteria was to be an old person or to have comorbidities or to be on lots of different medications, because that's complicated and messy. So I can understand why research into cannabis is going to be difficult and potentially not that financially viable. So what you've got is companies, who will be investing these millions of pounds, need to see where their return is coming from. And if they've got a product which isn't necessarily patentable, then that's where they come into difficulties. And I think you're just starting to see more interesting methods of administration, sort of CBD covered in nanoparticles or different delivery systems for things. So I think that's where there's sort of money, there's patents to be made. So it's a product or products that have a complicated pharmacology to them, which does an awful lot of different things. And it should be recognized that this comes with side effects and risks, just like any other medication. We do have people coming through who say they want to use cannabis because it's natural. Well, there's a lot of natural things which can kill you. So, simply being natural isn't, sort of good enough for me to think, well, yes, let's use that. I came to medical cannabis through my wife getting benefit from it. So much like the patient stories on the Drug Science website, it was an anecdote, and having anecdotes from people who have found it beneficial, is a form of evidence. The stories that are on the Drug Science website and the podcasts and things are incredibly moving. And when you hear particularly about Lucy's story, the benefit she had was undeniable. And to argue against that, I think, really goes against the ethos of being a healthcare practitioner. So that is upsetting. And yeah, the injustice of this, that if you're a person with a health problem and this could potentially help you, I think it's, we have a moral imperative to allow that person to give anything a try. And particularly something which, does have side effects and risks, acknowledged, but it's a lot safer than many of the medications I prescribe on a daily basis. And so we're in the situation now where the government have opened the door a tiny little crack. They've just let that sort of glint of light in by saying, okay, it is beneficial, but we don't have enough evidence to say that we'll give it on the NHS. And that only this very, very narrowly defined number of doctors can give it, only hospital consultants. And for anyone, again, who can see what the GPs prescribe on a day-to-day basis, they're making these very complicated risk-benefit analyses on everything. To suggest that, they're not competent or skilled enough to be prescribing, again, makes no sense. And when you look at the potential need for people for medical cannabis, hospital specialists are not going to be able to meet all of that demand. There are only a certain amount of hospital specialists to go around, and potentially 1% of the population could benefit from a medical cannabis prescription. When we've looked at other countries who have legalized medical cannabis, about 1% is the norm. And then I think you go to Israel, and then the percentage of that goes phenomenally high. So yes, the hospital specialists are now in the position whereby they are the only people who are allowed to prescribe these products. Hospital specialists, by the time you've got to that position, you've put in decades worth of work, and you've got to a point whereby you're already busy. Whatever your specialty is, you've got a patient caseload and demands on your time. And I can understand why this would appear to be too complicated, timely, and frankly risky. You risk having, a backlash from your colleagues because it's not mainstream. You risk, potentially your license. You have to get separate insurance to do this work at all. You have to go through the hoops of getting controlled drug prescription pads and signing up with your controlled drug accountable officer. You have to declare your interest to your employer. You have to have the time to do it. If you're a full-time consultant doing on-calls and extra shifts and things, you do need some of that work-life balance to prevent burnout. So there are good reasons why hospital specialists perhaps aren't taking this up. But again, I suppose there's a few people who are willing to put their head above the parapet. And as I say, I'm one of them. I think primarily because my wife has got benefit from this, and there is another doctor out there who prescribed for my wife. I couldn't do it due to GMC guidance. So I want someone else to prescribe for my wife. So why wouldn't I therefore provide that opportunity for other people? I suppose that's why we've came to the decision to open Cannabis Clinic Cardiff. One of the other requirements is to have another specialist on the same specialist register. For me, that would be psychiatry, registered with the GMC after completion of training, to discuss all cases with. So any case before you can prescribe also has to be discussed with another hospital consultant. So, if finding one hospital consultant is difficult, finding two willing to do this is even more difficult. And so it's, we're a bit like the Ark, we go 2 by 2 to make sure that, we're able to do that. And that's the regulations in Wales, by the way, to be able to discuss it with another hospital specialist. In England, the requirement is for the case to be discussed at an MDT, so a multidisciplinary team meeting, and that could be with various allied health professionals. You have to have all your documentation well recorded, auditable. You have to be registered with HIW, that's Health Inspectorate Wales. So any premises you're working from has to be registered with that inspection agency of healthcare establishments. That in England is called CQC, Care Quality Commission. So there are some slight differences between Wales and England and Scotland. We are the only clinic in Wales at the moment. There are a number of clinics in sort of England, Scotland, and the Channel Islands. And this is, as I say, it's a new venture for us. And so far, I think, we've been very impressed with the people who are coming to us. They're people who have really very difficult mental health conditions of a wide variety. These are people who typically are not cannabis users in general. I think maybe a quarter, a third of people are regular cannabis users for their ailment, rather than the majority who are just desperate people. And these are desperate people who've been put in the position of needing to come to a private clinic. This is essentially what we do. It's a private medical consultation, in the same way you would go to Bupa or Spire or one of these other ones to see a consultant about your dodgy hip or whatever. So that's why there is a certain barrier to entry in terms of cost. And then you've got products which also cost an awful lot of money, which people then have to find on a regular basis. So it's not a cheap option. In fact, if you were to compare it to black market, it's considerably more expensive. But there are reasons why you wouldn't necessarily want to do that, some of which Mags has already mentioned. Do you want to say anything on the black market, or?
Well, no, I
No.
just avoid the black market and go legal if you can at all possible. I mean, I think it can be comparatively price wise, depending on what people are paying on the black market, because there's such a range of what people are paying. And particularly if people are paying per gram, it's a lot more money, like £10 per gram. With medical cannabis, you can get it at a cheaper rate than that, depending on what medications that you are needing. So it is a price consideration. But if one person is already accessing cannabis for medical reasons on the black market, then they could access it legally, and it would be cost comparative depending on the product that they are prescribed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and to carry on from where Mag's kind of left off with the black market, you know, there are reports of contaminants within black market products. You know, some of the ones I've heard about over the years are being sprayed with chemicals to either make them look glistening and as if they've got those trichromes in there. That could be ground glass, was something we heard of. The products can be sprayed with things like spice in order to try and give people a bigger buzz so that they'll come back for more, essentially. You know, the products themselves can be very inconsistent. They could have, you know, pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers in them. You don't know whether they have had problems with mildew or fungus or spider mites or whatever it is. So the product you're being given, you don't necessarily know is the product you think it is. You know, there's the sort of top line varieties which people talk about, like green gelato and cali weed and Jack Herer and things, and
Star Dog.
Yeah, so all these names, I mean, and the dealer on the black market may be saying, yes, this is a consistent, you know, product, and it could be changing every 5 minutes. You don't know from one product to the next whether it is consistent. And if you found a particular strain which suits you really well, you don't want to go changing that. You need that as a health patient, you need a consistent product. And you know, to do with the additional sort of elements within it, as I say, the cannabinoids, the terpenes all have a different effect. And then you've got the products that can be turned into. So there are on the black market some oils which are invariably sort of THC oils, which don't have CBD in them, and the cannabis themselves doesn't have the CBD in them. And for me, I think it's such an overlooked compound. In many other countries, it is illegal or being legalized, and the demand for CBD is through the roof, and because they recognize how valuable a product that actually is. And it's beneficial for anxiety in and of itself. So when in this country, we have never made that drug illegal, CBD is available, you know, over the counter in Holland and Barrett, over the internet. People, I think, don't recognize the potential value of that. And I'm very excited to see where that goes in the future. Some of the work to do with neurological illnesses is very exciting. It's got many properties of anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective and antioxidant. It's, as I say, I think that's a very exciting area, and you want that to be part of any medicinal cannabis preparation you're having. I particularly like the CBD oils to be a consistent line through the medications that we suggest. It can be difficult to convince people of that because, as I say, it's undervalued. People think, well, it's everywhere. Whereas again, you've got, you know, the commercially available oils, which aren't medicines, so they've not gone through the same regulations and processes. You know, they're not necessarily guaranteed. Disreputable ones may not have any CBD in them at all. You have heard of products having melatonin and antihistamines, and again, spice. or higher levels of THC than you're expecting. There's supposed to be no THC or very little, and it could actually have some in it. Again, quite why, quite, so on the medical market, you have, a consistent product. And you want some of that in. And then if you are going to have some products with THC in, that will ameliorate some of those negative side effects as well. There's a question come in from Madeline. Is cannabis being used for patients with functional neurological disorder? Not to my knowledge. However, I wouldn't say that my knowledge is universally on point for all conditions. It's certainly something that's worth looking into. The number of journal articles now that are coming out to do with cannabis, cannabinoids, and the mental health and physical health illnesses is huge. So there could be evidence out there. I don't know about it. The kinds of conditions we typically prescribe for is anxiety. And it doesn't really matter why people have that anxiety. If it's for pain, we would give them medication for the anxiety, and it would have a beneficial effect on their pain, quite probably. So, people get the opportunity through us of having a trial of this medication. We have to monitor it, so we do outcome monitoring forms, and we have to have review appointments as well. So at least every 3 months, we have to review that person to make sure that they're still benefiting from it, they're not having side effects, and they're not becoming psychotic. And again, as Mag said, you're not going to have your black market dealer typically, except there are some good black market dealers out there, but they're not going to be monitoring your mental health and for psychotic symptoms at the same time, which is what you get when you come to a clinic like ours. Okay, so anxiety is the big one. We also see people with PTSD, people who have substance misuse disorder. CBD itself is starting to have some good research behind it for substance misuse, for reducing cravings. They've been looking at it for opiates, for nicotine as well. So there's good potential for that, and also reduces appetite as well, which some people may see as a side effect. Some people may think actually that's an effect I might want. Substance misuse, ADHD. Now, a lot of that evidence is anecdotal rather than the gold standard kind of research, but we have been having people who are getting benefit through ADHD, and certainly abroad, as we're saying, there is a bit more of an evidence base there. I would particularly like this area to be going more towards the neurological conditions. There's some good evidence there that THC-based therapies may be beneficial for people with dementia and behavioral and psychological disturbance. So, some of the medications we give to people with dementia, if they are aggressive, are quite strong medications. And I think this could be a potential avenue for research in the future. And again, not necessarily our area, but there is some evidence behind Parkinson's as well. So there's a reasonable evidence base at the moment for those. And in the future, I really do hope that this expands and the research allows us to prescribe to more people, and just a recognition of that risk-benefit balance, because hospital consultants can prescribe for any condition they feel has a sufficient evidence base. So all it takes is for the research to be done, and we can start adding to that list and say, at the moment, if I were to prescribe for some things which don't have the evidence base, that would place, say, my license at risk, and I don't want that. So the more research, the better. But I wasn't keeping an eye on time, so apologies if I went over there.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for sharing your story, and it's amazing to hear about Cannabis Clinic Cardiff and where it's going, and just the story of how you set it all up yourselves. We have a few questions, mainly on our end.
Yeah, there was one question. So once you were a consultant, is there any other additional hoops you have to go through in order to be able to prescribe medical cannabis?
Well, I think the first thing I did was join the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, and that is open to pretty much any sort of healthcare professional, and I'm sure they have student rates as well. And they provide training. So Mike Barnes, Professor Mike Barnes, who's one of the leading lights in this area, provides training every couple of months, which is 3 hours long, and goes through a lot of the things that a clinician would need to do the brass tacks work, and that was invaluable. So since then, I say the amount of research that's coming out, it's hard to keep on top of, but it's utterly fascinating. Again, that this was ever considered to have no medicinal values, it's just crazy.
And we did have another question, and it was that, do you think because it's particularly effective in mental health conditions, do you think that's had an impact on the speed of, well, the slowness of which everything's happened? Do you think if it was, I don't know, a cardiology condition, that it maybe would have been different?
Childhood epilepsy.
Yeah, I mean
that's why are there not more prescriptions for all those poor children who are suffering from that horrible epilepsy? There's only 3 that's been issued so far. So I see your point, but I think if they're not going to start opening up for childhood epilepsy, I think mental health is a long way behind that, isn't it?
Of course. One more question as well. Is just how well understood would you say the mechanisms for how medical cannabis works actually is at the moment? Is it something that's just accepted that it works or it doesn't, or can you say how exactly it works on the brain?
Well, if we go back to what medical cannabis actually is, it works on the endocannabinoid system, and that's something which certainly I was never taught about in medical school, and I don't know whether you guys are now, but
no.
Going back into the dim, distant past, the endocannabinoid system evolved in just slightly more multicellular organisms in the sea 600 million years ago. So the endocannabinoid system has grown up through the millennia, being a central, integral part of pretty much everything in the body. And the main receptors are within the neurological system, and it works as a homeostatic mechanism that it balances out some of the excitability. That's why I think it works with the neurological conditions, that you've got glutamate neuroexcitotoxicity, and it helps balance that out. And that's why perhaps it works with the epilepsy. When I've looked at some of the sort of biological, clinical, preclinical research, it confuses the heck out of me. It talks about various enzymes and chemicals and pathways I have no idea about. However, they're there, they work. And if we can get to this point now, once those people have done their preclinical research, we can then take that step to start doing the clinical research and get it actually in patients, do the placebo-controlled trials if that's what we need to do, and just demonstrate that, yes, even though perhaps we don't know the mechanism, and there are many drugs which we don't know the mechanism of, and not least for us in mental health, ECT, and things. So yes, so it's something that I couldn't put my hand on my heart and say I know why it works, but that's something for science to uncover. We've got 70 years of catching up to do.
Of course. I think that's a very nice analogy. Again, thank you so much for coming along and for sharing your amazing story of how this has come along. It's actually got us very excited for what's coming forward with medical cannabis. So our last speaker. Oh, sorry.
No worries. Hi there, guys. Thank you for your talks, all of you. It was really, really fascinating. I was a question about if we or cannabis was to be legalized recreationally in the UK, what would that have? Do you think that would have a positive impact in terms of the way like NICE and general doctors would view cannabis, and would it make it easier for it to be accepted in terms of research and in terms of cost wise? How do you think it would play out? Would it be beneficial in terms of the people who need it medically?
Well, I think it's two different things, is the medical and the adult use market. I think if the adult use market does get legalized in the UK, I think there will be an impact on the cost of medication because there'll be more coming in. But the medication is one thing and adult use is the other. And they have to be kept separately. And if we confuse the two, then, you know. But I'm optimistic on a personal level. Adult use does become legalized in the country. It's been legalized in Germany and they're going through it right now. But in terms of this, we have to talk about medical cannabis, unfortunately. And I'll leave that part for you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things to be wary of is if you do legalize for adult use, in some countries there has been a rush to the adult use market. So the producers of medical cannabis, you know, can get more bang for their buck, more money for their weed by putting it through adult use availability, because they don't have to do all that messy business of medicine. You know, they can, you know, just sell it through their dispensaries to adults. And that does a disservice to the medical cannabis market. So in some ways, the medical cannabis market may actually have detriment as a result of the adult use becoming more liberal.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Just being conscious of time, I know Hannah's waiting to start her talk. So I'm going to pass on to Hannah. And again, thank you so much to Dave and Sam for their talk.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Sam, for sharing the story about how you ended up prescribing medical cannabis. Super interesting. And of course, thank you, Gareth and Izzy. I'm just going to share my screen. So hopefully this should work. There we go. So I'm Hannah. I work at Drug Science and I'm a study coordinator there. So I'm working on a medical cannabis and long COVID small clinical trial. And the principal investigator on the study, so the prescribing doctor, is Dr. Elizabeth Iveson. And then I'm also working alongside Carol Crosser, who's the research nurse, Michael Linsky, Anna Schlag, and David Nutt, all from Drug Science. So just to provide you with a little bit of a background of what long COVID is, so it's now defined by WHO as post-COVID-19 syndrome. So it's symptoms that would develop after an acute infection of COVID, and normally it'd have to last for at least 3 months after the initial infection. So the Office of National Statistics have estimated that there's currently 1.3 million people living in the UK with self-reported long COVID. So the NHS did try to set up long COVID clinics to try and help manage the emerging condition of long COVID. They are releasing the data for the number of patients with 30s clinics, and roughly it stands around 5,000 patients per month, which suggests that there's a huge unmet need for long COVID. So as we all know, long COVID is an emerging clinical condition. There's still so much that's unknown about it. It's complicated. It's a multi-system disease. It develops after COVID, the initial COVID infections, thought to have a different pathogenesis to it. So symptoms really vary for patients in the set of symptoms they have, but also the severity. So some of the kind of key symptoms include fatigue, shortness of breath, cognitive dysfunction, often called brain fog in the media, a general impact on everyday functioning, just impacting how well you can do the everyday tasks, mood disturbances such as anxiety and depression, an impact on sleeping, and dysautonomia, which is your dysregulation of your autonomic nervous system. So there's really a lack of treatment approaches, and there is this real urgent need to try and find different treatments for patients suffering with long COVID. So as discussed already today, really, with medical cannabis is prescribed typically to treat symptoms, to try and improve the quality of life of patients. These symptoms are quite common in certain chronic medical diagnoses, such as MS, fibromyalgia, and inflammatory arthritis. So some of the most common symptoms that medical cannabis is prescribed for include pain, anxiety, mood disturbances, spasticity, fatigue, and seizures. And interestingly, some of these key symptoms are also reported in patients suffering with long COVID, particularly the fatigue, the anxiety, the mood disorders, and the pain. So what's the evidence that medical cannabis might be beneficial in the treatment of symptoms associated with long COVID? So there's a convincing evidence base now in the literature for the role of medical cannabis in pain, fatigue, mood, and just this overall improvement of quality of life of patients. So as Mags discussed earlier, there's emerging real world evidence, such as that created by Project 2021, on just the role of medical cannabis in treating symptoms such as pain and other conditions, including anxiety, depression, insomnia, and a whole array of different conditions. So we're also particularly interested in the antidepressant and anti-anxiety effects of CBD, as discussed by Dave, and also the anti-inflammatory properties of CBD. So with CBD, we're also particularly interested in the impact, the kind of reduced impact of the cardiovascular complications it has compared to THC. So really, though, what's an emerging theory in the literature is the role of dysautonomia in long COVID. So this dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, essentially you could stand up and your heart rate just increases so rapidly. Sorry. And your heart rate increases really rapidly, or you could walk up the stairs and you're not able to get your heart rate back down to normal. And this dysautonomia is also reported in patients with other post-viral conditions, but also multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, fibromyalgia, and all these conditions are currently already treated with medical cannabis. So overall, this provided an evidence base that medical cannabis could be used as an effective treatment for symptoms of long COVID, and provided us with the rationale needed to push forward with our medical cannabis and long COVID study. So just to give you a brief background on our study design. So it's a clinical trial, it's single arm and open label, which means all participants will be receiving the drug. We're recruiting 30 participants, so it's a small feasibility study. And the medical cannabis we're using is provided by BOD, who's the sponsor of the study, and it's Medicabilis Cannabis Sativa 50. So that's the full spectrum CBD dominant plant-based medicinal cannabis. So it contains 50 mg per mil of CBD and 2 mg per mil of THC. So the dose will be initially titrated over a 2-week period, so just slowly increased up to a total dose of 2 mils, which is equivalent to 100 mg of CBD and 4 mg of THC. And then the prescribing doctor will use their clinical judgment to decide whether this could be increased to a total daily dose of 3 mils. All participants will be on the study for a total of 24 weeks. So just to clarify again, that's a 2-week titration period at the beginning, 18-week study dose, a 1-week dose reduction, followed by 3 weeks with no medication. So this is a feasibility study, which means our primary outcomes are really focused on recruitment, retention of participants for the full 6 months, and number of side effects to assess the safety of medical cannabis in this population. And then our secondary outcomes will really be looking at the impact of the medical cannabis on the symptoms associated with long COVID. So several of these outcomes will be assessed using a smartphone app from Altaflora. So these are standardized questionnaires to assess long COVID symptoms, fatigue, quality of life, pain, mood, and sleep. And then we'll be using Fitbits, which will be worn for the duration of the study, which will be able to report on sleep, resting heart rate, activity levels. So for example, how many steps you've walked throughout the whole day, as well as blood oxygen saturation. We'll also be using the Ultraflora app to ask participants to grade key symptoms for 7 days per 28 days. So here you go again, just to give you a brief overview of what the study really looks like in terms of a timeline. So here you can see it's the baseline visit, where participants will have their initial first clinical assessment, followed by clinical assessments every 4 weeks. You can see the medical cannabis, which is medical cannabis, the initial titration period, steady dose, dose reduction, and then 3 weeks with no medication. The Fitbit will be worn for the duration of the study again. And you can see that you have the monthly questionnaires and then the daily symptoms recorded for 7 days per 28. So that was medical cannabis study for long COVID. Other ways that you can kind of give you an overview of how you can keep in contact with drug science. Obviously, there's the Drug Science Student Society that's been set up by Gareth and Izzy. Keep in contact with or keep up to date with all the educational resources on the website. Really great slide sets. Sorry, and drug information pages, and don't forget to check out the Drug Science podcast. And just a plug for the Student Psychedelic Conference on the 9th to 10th of April. It's online. It's online, like 100% recommend it. It's great if you're an undergraduate or postgraduate and you want to attend a conference. They have a great set of speakers lined up. Fully recommend it. Sorry, always get a tickle. And that's it. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That was brilliant.
Sorry, I've got such a little tickle just coming.
Here when that happens,
Yeah.
It's no way of getting rid of it, I always find.
Always tech issues or a tickle in your throat. So if there's any questions, I'm really happy to answer them, or general questions about drug science, about how you can get involved.
Yeah, well, our first question was going to be, how did you get involved in drug science?
So I know I should have given a brief introduction like Mags. So I'm actually a basic researcher by background. Sorry, so I studied biochemistry as my undergraduate, and then I went on to do a PhD in neuroscience at University of Manchester. But it was researching stroke, so very much preclinical scientist. And then kind of like you two, got involved in drug advocacy during my PhD, things like putting on events, writing blogs. I didn't start a society though, so you know, definitely ahead of me there. And then through that work, I met a professor called Joe Neal and got involved with drug science and started working as a HRA. It's an honorary research assistant, which then kind of developed into the study coordinator role. So it's kind of been a few small steps to get there. And if you look on the drug science website, a lot of the content there has been created by honorary research assistants, that's students typically, or the slide sets, or they've been made in collaboration with other organisations we work closely with, and the blogs, the articles, and the drug information pages, that's kind of all been created by students who wanted to get involved in some way. So not necessarily a most conventional route, a bit, I guess, like a bit like Mags, but yeah, a basic scientist by background.
Amazing. That links on really nicely with our next question, which would be more aimed towards the audience. How can how can students get involved with drug science, whatever course or whatever background they come from?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I think when I was asked this before at another event, I would say find out what you like from this kind of field. So whether that's writing articles, writing blogs, putting on events like this, for example. Some people really enjoy searching the literature and writing articles or creating resources, and for some people that's the idea of how. You know, it could even be as simple as creating graphics. So that's more, you know, if you're more creative, there really is space for everyone. It's just finding really kind of what your niche is. As there's a lot of medics on the call, hosting these events is particularly important, finding out, you know, really what the next steps would be, like as Dave was talking about, how you can become a prescriber in the future. So really just work out what it is that you really enjoy within, you know, medical cannabis, medical psychedelics, safe consumption, and just seeing where you can apply your skills within that area.
Yeah,
fab. And we have one other question, which was why long COVID? Why did you pick that specifically to go for?
So because it was provided through, we have like a working group, and like consisted of different experts in the medical cannabis field, and it was put forward as the symptoms being so similar with conditions that were already being prescribed medical cannabis, that it kind of made a rationale for long COVID, and there was just this urgent need. And there's already post-viral conditions being prescribed with medical cannabis, and really it was just, with something like Project 2021, you can see the scale of how medical cannabis can be prescribed, and with long COVID there's going to be such a huge unmet need. I think that's a good kind of demonstration of how medical cannabis can be prescribed on a larger scale, and how symptoms can be tracked on a larger scale. So really it's just what the evidence provided rationale, and the need is such a need really for long COVID that there was the funding to be able to do the study, because new treatments are desperately needed.
Of course. Yeah. My next question was going to be how can we keep up to date with the results of the trial?
So, well, don't worry, we'll make sure we definitely share them on All Drug Science social media. I think for anyone who's not following Drug Science already on Twitter, on Instagram, definitely recommend following them. Also, it's the website. There's frequently on the research page and news page on the website is updated. I mean, sometimes even I miss stuff on there. So just frequently checking there, but really social media and the newsletters, and hopefully we'll be able to publish, well, we will be publishing the results when the study finishes, so that will be the main way, but we'll try and make sure that we do it also for more of a public audience as well, so it's not just a published paper, make sure that a more general audience can kind of access the results and the data and the findings in an accessible way.